It's so different. I have a son now. He's a Londoner. My wife is a Londoner. You know, I'm as equally a Londoner as anything else, and I love that. I love that a lot.
Oh, Amit Olonge ending the show there, because that's it. We are back with the latest after ITV News at 10. Coming up, Charlene with the ITV Evening News. But from me and the rest of the London team, bye-bye.
Russian airstrikes moving further and wider across Ukraine, hitting airfields and homes. Fighting intensifies outside the capital Kyiv, and cities not previously hit find themselves in the firing line.
It's not clear why this factory was targeted, but this could represent a new front in this war, as the city of Dnipro waits to see if it will be hit with more airstrikes.
But is the widening of targets a sign of renewed Russian confidence or desperation? We're in Lviv, where the burying of the dead doesn't stop, despite the danger of further shelling. Also tonight, the Queen cancels another big engagement. Prince Charles will represent her at Monday's Commonwealth service. An apology at last to the survivors of sexual... And Chelsea hero Frank Lampard on the struggle ahead for his former club.
There is some doubt in the future and uncertainty, and not just Chelsea. I think we're watching the news every day and understanding what's happening in the world.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. There are fears tonight that Russia is starting a new phase of its invasion in Ukraine after more cities were bombed. Dnipro was struck for the first time, with reports of civilian buildings being hit in airstrikes. And the United States says Russian troops are now within 3 miles of Kyiv, with a large military convoy north of the capital now repositioned. Ukraine's president, though, remains defiant, and today said his country has reached a strategic turning point in the war. Our correspondent, Dan Rivers, has the latest.
Dnipro had been spared until this morning. Just after dawn, a shoe factory was hit in the heart of a residential district. This building was destroyed, and with it, an entire city's peace of mind. Until now, they've been watching the horror of this war unfold in other places. Now it was right on their doorstep, and for some, it was too much. This couple were leaving, unsure when they'll come back and what they'll find when they do. It's not clear why this factory was targeted, but this could represent a new front in this war, as the city of Dnipro waits to see if it will be hit with more airstrikes.
I beg you to tell the world about another act of state terrorism. It's not just a war. It's state-sponsored terrorism by a powerful country against us.
As we filmed the smouldering wreckage, suddenly we were told to run for cover, sirens suggesting another strike might be imminent.
We've just heard the air raid sirens going, and we've been told to take cover, so we're coming down into the metro now.
In the sanctuary below, families who'd been here since early morning, too terrified to move, children bewildered by the sudden plunge into a conflict that until now had been something they'd only seen on TV. This man was injured by flying glass when the bomb fell. His wife doesn't know what they'll do, saying it's all too unpredictable. And today other cities were also experiencing this sudden jolt of war coming without warning. This was the historic city of Lutsk, an hour from Poland but a world away. Those watching this must have thought it was the end of the world. And in the western Ukrainian city of Ivano-Frankivsk, plumes of smoke from airstrikes which are bringing the war ever closer to the borders of the European Union. The fighting around Kyiv is becoming fiercer and getting closer. Ukrainian soldiers engaged in gun battles to hold off advancing Russian forces. They know this isn't just a fight for the capital, it's a struggle for Ukraine's survival. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, let's take a look at how the situation stands tonight. The red shading shows the areas of Ukraine under Russian control. As Dan was just reporting, the latest attacks have hit the western cities of Lutsk, Ivano-Frankivsk and Dnipro in the east. And on the outskirts of Kyiv, much of the Russian convoy has broken up and been redeployed, seen here in a forest around 20 miles northwest of the capital. And our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Kyiv tonight. James, is this a new phase of the war? And is it a sign of confidence or desperation from Vladimir Putin?
Well, Charlene, on the very first night of the war, they attacked Western Ukraine, air bases in particular, in an attempt to suppress the Ukrainian Air Force. Now, the fact they've had to return to those sort of targets and to factories that service aircraft engines may well be a sign of frustration that they have still not knocked the Ukrainian Air Force out of the air, that they're still subject to drone attacks, and that Western weapons are still being flown into Western Ukraine. I mean, there's two very different ways of looking at how the war is going tonight. I mean, that convoy is now positioned in a way that could be the start of an attack on the capital. The Americans say they're closer to the centre than they ever have been. Maybe they finally got their offensives sorted out. But on the other hand, we have news that a third Russian major general has been killed near the front. Extremely unusual for officers that senior to be anywhere near the front. We've got the Russian president appealing for Syrian volunteers to come and help. So and these are things that don't necessarily point to a battle going exactly as planned.
All right, James, thank you. Well, Russia's ambassador to the UN has made an extraordinary claim that Ukraine and the US were plotting to spread biological weapons using birds, bats and insects. The US rubbished the far-fetched claims and pointed out it was Russia who has a dark history of using chemical warfare. Well, Robert Moore is in Washington for us. And Robert, this was quite some exchange, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, even for veteran diplomats at the UN, this was bizarre. We saw in Dan's report the devastating scenes on the ground. We've heard from James his grim analysis. But the diplomacy is shockingly surreal as well. The UN Security Council meeting not to talk about a ceasefire, but rather for the Russians to peddle this extraordinary conspiracy theory, namely that the Ukrainians, with American support, are running a network of secret biological weapons laboratories. There's no evidence for that at all, but the Americans are deeply alarmed. It's all part of a Russian false flag operation.
Russia has a track record of falsely accusing other countries of the very violations that Russia itself is perpetrating. And given that, we have serious concerns that Russia may be planning to use chemical or biological agents against the Ukrainian people.
And of course, Russia does indeed have that track record of using a nerve agent in Salisbury, of sanctioning almost certainly the Syrians using chemical weapons in that civil war. And all of this begs the question that if Russia does use in the Ukrainian battle space prohibited weapons, what does NATO, what does the United States do? Does it draw them into the conflict directly as a belligerent? So these are big, troubling and unanswered questions here tonight.
OK, thanks, Robert. Well, as the efforts fail to find a diplomatic solution, the violence continues on the ground, with mounting casualties on both sides. The funeral of 3 Ukrainian soldiers was held in a military church in the western city of Lviv today. But it's not just those fighting who are getting hurt, as our correspondent Romilly Weeks reports from Lviv.
Carried in by their comrades, followed by their families. 3 soldiers were buried in Lviv today. The chanting of the priests in the city's main military church, unable to mask the sound of sobbing. Maria's son was killed in the fighting in the south. He was only 26. Lviv might have escaped the shelling so far, But it has not escaped the pain.
It's very hard to get an accurate figure for the number of Ukrainian military losses, but the bodies are coming back from the front lines, and there's no hiding the grief of the families.
It's not only Ukrainian soldiers counting the cost of this war. In the children's hospital, we met some of its youngest victims. Kira is just 9 months old. She has shrapnel in her leg from a Russian attack that almost killed her.
Did he say that he was on the phone to his wife as this was happening?
Kira's father Artem told me his wife and children were fleeing in a civilian car. "We're being shot at, I love you," was the last thing he heard. 2 family friends in the front were killed. Kira's mother managed to crawl out of the car and hide with the 2 injured children. Not even one, and already having seen so much of the horror of war. Artem says he'll get his family better and then return east to fight. What else can you do, he asks, when they're trying to kill our children? Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Lviv in Ukraine.
Here, the government's encouraging British people to put up Ukrainian refugees in their own homes. Charities and businesses will also be able to house refugees who will be able to work and have access to public services. The scheme's expected to be officially unveiled in the next few days. It follows criticism over the government's response to the crisis. Here's our political reporter, Shihab Khan.
More than 2 million people are thought to have fled Ukraine in the search for safety. The refugee crisis is growing. And the question is, where will they and can they go? Our government has been widely criticised for its slow response, but is expected to outline the details of its new sponsorship scheme in the coming days.
So we're going to put a wall up back through here, which will come right up along here.
The Porters in Dover are renovating their home so that they can open their doors to a Ukrainian family.
I think it's just being human, to be honest. I honestly believe, watching the news, how could you not want to help? I can't believe it's happening, to be honest. We've got plenty of space which we can offer to people.
The new scheme is expected to allow families, businesses and communities to provide accommodation and help for refugees. This morning I asked this minister if he was willing to offer up his home.
In principle, I would do whatever I can to help. I'm obviously working as a minister night and day. Other people are, providing, donations, humanitarian assistance. All of us will help in whatever way we possibly can.
At the moment, Ukrainian refugees can only come to the UK if they've got family here. That scheme, according to the latest data, has seen around 1,000 visas so far. This new scheme, although we don't have the details, is set to be unlimited, and the hope is that it will reach the hundreds of thousands. But is that a reasonable figure to be aiming for? Charities, who will play a big role in the process, think it's unlikely.
Community sponsorship schemes have existed in the UK since 2015, but it's deeply just disingenuous of the government to even suggest that community sponsorships schemes can offer anything like the scale and pace of resettlement support for the people fleeing Ukraine. We don't know when the scheme will launch. We don't know what sort of numbers are projected. We don't know what sort of mechanism will be in place.
As the invasion continues, this refugee crisis will get bigger and the urgency to act will only grow stronger. Shihab Khan, ITV News, Westminster.
Britain's Foreign Secretary has sanctioned nearly 400 members of Russia's parliament in the latest actions against the Russian economy. The politicians are all members of the lower house called the Duma. Our economics editor Joel Hills is at the Foreign Office for us tonight. Joel, how significant is this latest step?
This is punishment, clearly, for those parliamentarians who voted to recognise the breakaway states of Luhansk and Donetsk in eastern Ukraine and supported the invasion. All but 50 of the members of the Duma now find themselves shut out entirely from the UK. In practice, how many of them really could have made it here, even if they wanted to, given that airspace is closed? And we don't know also how many of them have assets here in the UK that the British government intends to freeze. The objective of sanctions, though, clearly is to force policy change in Russia. It's hard to imagine the Duma standing up to Vladimir Putin. And since sanctions were imposed, you can't help but notice that military tactics in Ukraine have got far more aggressive. Russia is also retaliating. Today, it banned instant Instagram, after the parent company Meta said it would not block threats of violence against Vladimir Putin or Russian soldiers on its social media platforms. Last week, of course, we saw WhatsApp and Facebook closed down in Russia. And the corporate fallout continues. Tonight, British American Tobacco has changed its mind. It is no longer going to sell cigarettes in Russia. It has decided its business there is completely unsustainable and it intends to offload it in the next few weeks and months.
OK, John, thanks very much. There's plenty more to come on the ITV Evening News, including...
Today, we say that we are sorry. We neglected you, rejected you, we made you feel unwanted.
An admission of failure and a long-awaited apology from Stormont to the victims of historical abuse. Breaking news tonight, the Queen pulls out of the Commonwealth Day service. We'll have the latest. And stress over sponsors at Stamford Bridge, the fallout of freezing Abramovich's assets. We've got a busy rest of the show ahead tonight, so do join us after the break. Welcome back. The Queen has announced she won't be attending the annual Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey next week. It comes after she recently recovered from COVID. Well, let's talk to our Royal Editor, Chris Shipp. Chris, what's the palace said?
Well, Charlene, the reason why this is so significant is because the Queen places as much importance on this Commonwealth Day service at Westminster Abbey. It happens every year, as she does, for example, attending Remembrance Sunday at the Cenotaph. The Commonwealth means a lot to her. And as recently as yesterday, Buckingham Palace were telling us that the Queen was planning to attend on Monday. But then in the last hour, we had an announcement from them that she's now asked the Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, to represent her at that service. Now, we saw the Queen just on Monday when she met Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, at Windsor Castle. She's clearly well enough to do those in-person audiences, which she's returned to doing since her COVID infection, and we're told she'll have more of those next week. However, I think this comes down to probably less illness and more about her mobility. It's about getting the Queen from Windsor Castle to Westminster Abbey, and then the walk from the car all the way through the nave, down through into the choir section where she sits and sitting there for a good length of time. So I think it's more of a mobility issue. And if you remember those pictures we saw of her recently when she met some members of her defence staff, and she said to them that she was unable to move. She had her walking stick there, something she's been using only in the past few months or so. Clearly, I think we're talking about mobility here, and Buckingham Palace said that it isn't down to any new illness, but pulling out, as she has done, that's a pretty big deal.
Indeed, Chris, thank you. Well, some other royal news that was announced tonight. Prince Harry says he won't be returning to the UK for the memorial service for the Duke of Edinburgh. It follows his legal case against the Home Office over his security arrangements in this country. The service will take place later this month. His spokesperson said Harry does, though, hope to see the Queen soon. The Northern Ireland Assembly has given a long-awaited public apology to victims who suffered decades of terrible abuse in state and church-run children's homes. Religious organisations and the charity Barnardo's also say sorry for their role. It follows the publication of a shocking inquiry in 2017. Some survivors welcomed the move, but others said it was too little, too late. Sarah Clark reports on their long fight for justice.
A landmark day for survivors of institutional child abuse. Their journey's been long and fraught with obstacles. Saying sorry should have happened much sooner.
This is into the 15th year of campaigning. You couldn't believe this, that we'd have to do this, beg and plead for someone to listen.
But today they did finally receive a state apology from Stormont after years of suffering.
Today we say that we are sorry. We neglected you, rejected you, we made you feel unwanted. It was not your fault. The state let you down.
Alice Walker's brothers were taken into care by a religious order for playing truant when they were just 9. The family unaware of the torture they'd endured until the public inquiry.
My brother was one of the worst abused children. And it was very, very hard
for us to take us.
Children suffered physical, sexual and emotional abuse at 22 children's homes in Northern Ireland, run by the state, church and charities, from 1922 to 1995. A public inquiry was launched in 2014, the largest of its kind in the UK, with recommendations published 3 years later. Almost 500 people came forward to report abuse, but the real number of victims is thought to be much higher.
The De La Salle order.
The head of the Catholic Church in Ireland has already apologised. Today, it was the turn of the religious orders.
We recognise our part in the pain caused to you. We cannot undo it, but we wish to say we are genuinely sorry.
I will never, never accept the apology for what they've done to my brother. May God forgive them. And they were supposed to be men of God.
Today has been a chance for state, church and society to reflect on a shameful period of the past. The trauma has clearly taken its toll. Sarah Clark, ITV News, Belfast.
There are fears for the future of Chelsea Football Club after owner Roman Abramovich was hit by major government sanctions. His proposed sale of the club is on hold and it's not allowed to sell merchandise or match tickets. Tonight, Barclays suspended the club's bank account. Sponsors are also starting to pull out, as Amy Lewis reports.
It is a symbol of a club in crisis. 3 Mobiles spent millions to have their logo on Chelsea's shirt, but now they can't distance themselves from the club and its Russian owner quickly enough. But some of the fans are singing from a very different song sheet. Roman Abramovich's name reverberated around the stadium again last night ahead of their match against Norwich. Chelsea's manager has suggested the club should show its support for Ukraine on the front of their shirt, a gap left by its sponsor.
We can always wear a message for peace, and this can never be the wrong message. So, of course,
Abramovich has been sanctioned by the UK government because of his links to President Putin, meaning he can no longer bankroll Chelsea. Under the government's restrictions, Chelsea can fulfil their fixtures this season, but they cannot, for example, sell merchandise or tickets. Now, the club are asking the government to review this licence, they say, so they can continue to operate. One source here has told me that if that doesn't happen, they will quickly go into the Reds. Shirt sponsor 3 have already pulled out of their £40 million a season deal. But training partner Trivago is sticking with the club, saying they are looking forward to a transition of ownership. Nike, who have the biggest deal with Chelsea at £900 million, have remained silent. As a player, Frank Lampard won every major trophy going during Abramovich's ownership.
A lot of players, I think, generally in my experience, will just concentrate on the job in hand. And I try to do that as a player. But this is a bit bigger than that. I understand that. There is some doubt in the future and uncertainty. And not just Chelsea. I think we're watching the news every day and understanding what's happening in the world. It's bigger doubt and bigger perspective than ever.
The government is making a high-profile example of Abramovich. The question is whether Putin really cares. Amy Lewis, ITV News.
Don't forget, you can stay up to date on what's happening on our website. You'll find the latest from your area, plus special sections on everything from Ukraine to politics and entertainment. But here's what's coming up in the next half an hour before Emmerdale begins. A special report on the Syrian children scarred by Russian bombing. That's in a moment. A damning verdict on the Met and how they policed the vigil for Sarah Everard.
I'm usually impatient, don't like to waste my time.
Why Empire star Jussie Smollett will be spending 150 days behind bars.
You say, me llamo.
Tributes to the Sesame Street star who taught millions of children about friendship.
And what makes a storm worthy of a name? With some wet and windy weather on the way, I'll be explaining all.
But first, the possibility of chemical weapons being used in Ukraine has chilling echoes of the war in Syria. Russian forces were heavily involved in that conflict, and some of the children caught in the middle are still suffering the consequences. Our correspondent Peter Smith went to Turkey to meet the child victims living with the legacy of another of President Putin's wars. They've been left not just with physical scars, but mental ones as well.
While the world is shocked at Putin's brutal assault on Ukraine, Syrian children like Elif know all about Russia's merciless bombardments. She's only 9, but already she understands the real cost of war.
It used to hurt here. I have scars, but it's better than it was. I had some operations, and this is my face now.
In the lottery of birth, some children get lucky. Some get Aleppo in Syria. This was Elif's misfortune, to be born here, while Putin's planes worked with the Syrian regime to deliver a deadly arsenal of bombs and chemical weapons. When Elif's family fled this hell, they were bombed again in a refugee camp. This was Elif before, a bright, talkative girl. Then, the day the bomb hit. It is now the 11th anniversary of war in Syria, and Elif's mother feels like many Western leaders no longer remember or care.
I saw my husband and all my children burnt. My son Ahmed died. He was 10 years old. The rest of us were taken to a field hospital and transferred to Turkey for treatment. My daughter Elif now has psychological damage. She used to be so happy. Now she hides from people. She says, "I don't want people to see my face."
In Turkey, Elif has found a glimmer of hope. This is home to some of the world's best plastic surgeons, and frustrated by the lack of help, they are now volunteering to treat Syrian children scarred by war. But the physical wounds are just part of the suffering.
What are some of the long-term consequences of the kinds of injuries you see?
These injuries are the ones we can see. But unfortunately, these children will suffer for the rest of their lives. Many of them cannot have children. Some could have cancer.
Because of the burns?
Yes, yes.
They could be developing cancer later in life.
The next patient, Emine, is one of the most concerning. She's been through surgery 40 times to rebuild her face, and she's only 14. This was Emine before, standing with her brother. Now she has safe haven in Turkey, but still suffers unimaginably. She needs specially made clothing to ease the pain on her skin. This help she and the other children are getting now is only possible because of this one woman in Turkey. Ayşegül noticed so many scarred Syrian children in refugee camps, and fed up waiting for the world to act, she set up the charity delivering treatment.
How many other Syrian children have you helped?
We have helped 400 children from Syria.
More than 400?
Yes, and many more need our help.
Even after 11 years of war, more are still coming.
Emine's father has never been able to speak before about what happened to his daughter, but this time he says he wants to talk, so the world won't forget.
I keep asking, what did any child do to deserve this? Like what's happened to my daughter?
While Putin now rolls out war in Europe, Syrians like this are reminded of his legacy every minute of every day. But somehow these are the lucky ones, scarred in different ways, but they have lived to tell their story. After 11 years, they just don't know if the world is still listening, because while Syria keeps burning, the focus is fading from their forgotten war. Peter Smith, ITV News, Ankara.
Now let's get an update on what's making the news tonight. There are fears of fresh shelling in previously untouched parts of Ukraine as President Putin widens where troops are told to attack. We found out in the last hour that the Queen won't attend the annual Commonwealth Day service on Monday. The news came as Prince Harry confirmed tonight he won't be coming back to the UK for the memorial event for his grandfather, the Duke of Edinburgh. The organisers of a vigil for murder victim Sarah Everard have had their human rights violated by the Met Police. High Court judges today said the police handling of the planned event was wrong and not in accordance with the laws. Ellie Pitt has more.
They are 4 women who refuse to let police power scare them into silence. Today, High Court judges ruled that the Metropolitan Police failed to properly consider their right to freedom of expression and assembly.
The judgment is hard-hitting. It's not a oh, the police got it wrong a little bit. It's that they absolutely got it wrong. And trying to silence us was the worst thing they could have done.
The group wanted to gather last year to remember a woman whose voice was taken away. Sarah Everard was murdered by a then-serving police officer. A planned vigil in South London was cancelled after Met police officers warned the organisers they could be fined under COVID rules. At the time, London was under restrictions that banned more than 30 people getting together. But then this, more spontaneous event happened, marred by the controversy of the action taken by Met officers. Patsy Stevenson, seen here on the night, was arrested and fined £200 for breaking COVID laws. This morning she got a call telling her about the High Court decision.
I cried on the phone because it's a big win. I just think for everyone that was there and everyone who stood up for women's rights that night, they needed this today.
The High Court judges ruled that decisions taken by the Metropolitan Police Service that led to the original vigil being cancelled were simplistic, misinformed and legally mistaken. In a statement, the Metropolitan Police said the Met worked very hard in challenging circumstances to interpret and apply the regulations lawfully and proportionately, despite numerous changes during the pandemic. The force is now considering whether to appeal. If they need to, these women tell me they will continue to fight. Ellie Pitt, ITV News.
A man has been sentenced to a whole life prison term for the murders of a mother and son and a pregnant woman. Anthony Russell pleaded guilty to killing 31-year-old Nicole McGregor, who was found in Woodlands near Leamington Spa, as well as 58-year-old Julie Williams and her son David in Coventry in October 2020. The court was told Russell refused to attend his sentencing. To the United States now, where actor Jussie Smollett was shocked to find himself sentenced to 150 days in jail for staging an attack against himself. A judge told the Empire star that bringing attention to himself was the only reason for doing such a crazy thing. Smollett, though, raised his fist and shouted that he was innocent. Mark McQuillan on the real-life courtroom drama.
Jussie Smollett's performance throughout this trial has been consistent. The actor insisting he is innocent and that he did not stage a fake hate crime against himself.
If I did this, then it means that I stuck my fist in the fears of black Americans in this country for over 400 years and the fears of the LGBTQ community. Your Honor, I respect you and I respect the jury, but I did not do this.
They disagreed, though, and he's been jailed for 150 days.
I'm usually impatient, don't like to waste my time.
Smollett was an aspiring actor and singer, black, gay, and a star of the TV show Empire. But the court concluded he had staged a fake hate crime, aimed at raising his profile, which it did, but not in the way he would have wanted. He initially claimed he'd been sent a racist letter from supporters of then-President Trump and said he was attacked in Chicago in January 2019, reporting to police that he was targeted by 2 men in the street who tied a noose around his neck.
I understand how difficult it will be to find them, but we gotta.
He even did an interview calling for the perpetrators to be caught, but things began to unravel. The 2 would-be attackers were actually brothers who said they'd been paid to carry out the fake attack and given money to buy ski masks and a rope as part of it all. Prosecutors say Smollett's actions could now have wider implications.
His conduct denigrated hate crimes. His conduct will discourage others who are the victims of hate crimes from coming forward.
Smollett is expected to be out of prison in a matter of weeks. It will likely take a lot longer for him to try and rebuild his reputation.
And I am innocent!
Mark McQuillan, ITV News.
A court was told today that former Grand Slam winner Boris Becker will be supported by a translator when he goes on trial later this month. Becker, who's a German national, of course, and now commentates on the sport, is accused of failing to hand over trophies from his career to settle debts after being declared bankrupt. Well, James Dunham is over at Southwark Crown Court where the hearing took place. James, what did the court hear today?
There was a 15-minute hearing, Charlene, focused on Boris Becker, who is, of course, a household name, former world #1, and in 1985, at 17 years old, he became Wimbledon's youngest ever male champion. Of course, in recent years, he's more used to commentating on the sport, as you are about to see.
It's played much more from the baseline. You have many more counter-punches than in nowadays match.
The defence lawyer for Becker outlined the fact that Becker's English is okay, but he would be better to express himself in German when it comes to his upcoming trial, and so a translator will relay his evidence. Now, he wasn't actually in court today. He did appear before magistrates, though, back in 2020, and the charges date back to 2017. When he was declared bankrupt. He's accused of failing to hand over some of his trophies whilst settling his debts. They include trophies from 2 Australian Open wins in 1991 and 1996, as well as that momentous Wimbledon win back in 1985. He denies all the charges against him, and he, Charlene, will appear in court in 2 weeks' time when his trial is expected to begin.
All right, James, thank you. The UK, with levels in Scotland at a record high. It's the first time since the recent cases. Around 1 in 25 people in households in England had COVID last week. Wales and Northern, an app widely used to track COVID symptoms, will not have its government funding renewed. The Zoe COVID study app was given more than £5 million in grants. The Health Security Agency says it will monitor coronavirus through other studies. And the inquiry into how the government's handling of the pandemic won't hold hearings until next year. More than 162,000 people have died within a month of testing positive for COVID in the UK. It could be a decisive weekend in the Six Nations, with France hoping to extend their lead when they take on Wales tonight. The French are top of the table and are currently the only unbeaten side in the competition. All 6 teams are playing over the course of the weekend, but Wales, the defending champions, will be looking to cause an upset. Our sports reporter Beth Fisher is in Cardiff where the match is taking place. Beth, it's the first game in over 20 years not to have sold out, isn't it?
Sells about 75,000 tickets, but tonight only 6 has been built since 1999. The Welsh rails have been lower than usual, but all week I've been speaking to Welsh clubs and fans, and they say that ticket prices, which are over £100, and the fact that it's on a Friday night, which adds to travel costs and hotel costs, mean that people just want to stay at home. But despite all that, they've won 3 out of 3 so far in this Six Nations campaign, but they are yet to win a Six Nations team. On the other hand, have only won 1 game against Scotland, and Dan Biggar earlier said this week that if they wanted to win this match, and they won't be the only ones wanting them to beat the French tonight. Obviously, Scotland take on Italy tomorrow, and on Sunday is a big clash. England take on Ireland, which is, of course, live on ITV.
Indeed, Beth, thank you. Tribute aged 81. As Louis from the Fix-It shop, he entertained generations of children for more than 4 decades. And as Rishi Davda reports, he was also credited with playing one of the longest-running Latino characters on TV.
Sometimes when you meet someone new, you don't know what to say.
An actor and singer who spent 45 years teaching children and bringing smiles to their faces.
Dum 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 dum. Hey, hi, Cookie. How you doing? Oh, hello, Luis.
Emilio Delgado first appeared on Sesame Street in 1971 as Louise, the Fix-It shop owner.
Hi, Louise.
Hi.
Louise was one of just a few Latino characters on American television at the time. Speaking on a YouTube series last year, Emilio reflected on Louise's long-lasting legacy.
This young woman came up and she looked Mexican-American and she was crying, and she said, our family was the only Mexican family in the whole town. And when I turned on the TV, You were the only other person that looked like me. And I couldn't wait to turn on Sesame Street just so that I could see you.
I feel so bad watching you work so hard.
On the show, Luis married Maria, teaching children about love, marriage and relationships. For Sesame Street viewers, he symbolised something special.
They showed a multicultural community, and that's what was so rare. It enabled me, as a black person growing up in the UK, to realise that multicultural communities are the norm.
Emilio died at the age of 81 from cancer. The creators of Sesame Street, his home for so many years, paid tribute, saying, "At the forefront of representation, Emilio proudly laid claim to the record for the longest-running role for a Mexican-American actor in a TV series. We are so grateful he shared his talents with us and the world."
We'll have great fun this lovely day.
Emilio's warm and familiar presence informed and entertained 3 separate generations. He was treated by many as part of the family.
Remembering Emilio Delgado, who's died aged 81. Emmerdale is coming up shortly, but still to come before that. The heartwarming story of the Ukrainian schoolboy who walked hundreds of miles to safety, reunited with his family.
And will it be a washout weekend? I'll have all the details shortly.
So join me and Alex for the forecast and that amazing story right after this. Hello again, welcome back. Alex is here, as you can see, and the weather's taken a little bit of a change, I feel, and I hear that there's weather warnings on the way.
You're right, Charlene. I don't think it's going to be a washout weekend, but certainly wet at times, and there are some wind warnings in place. In fact, let's take a look at what's going to be happening over the course of Saturday and Sunday. No named storms. We'll be taking a closer look at that in just a second, but you can see for Saturday across the southwest of England, early afternoon, this warning kicks into place. Out towards the coast, gusts of around 60 miles an hour possible, even inland 45 to 50. And as we push on into Sunday and we see an area of low pressure which is going to bring in the wind and rain through Saturday, that's going to make its way further north. And you can see out towards Irish Sea coastal areas, more warnings have been issued. And you can see in both areas, we're talking about gusts up to around 60 miles per hour. As I say, of the winds, so we're talking about how strong those gusts are likely to be, the impacts and how confident we are that that event is going to take place. But this weekend, we've got yellow warnings in place, less severe. That's not to say there won't be some local impacts, but you can see last month obviously was quite topsy-turvy, where we had 3 named storms in the space of 7 days. Obviously that gust of 122 miles an hour with Storm Eunice. As I say, we could see some impacts this weekend. The wind's really whipping up the sea, so perhaps not a great day for a trip to the coast. But all the same, I think it probably isn't going to be a weekend for getting the board games out.
But will we at least be able to go outside a couple of times?
I think we will. There will be some sunny spells, but just watch out for the showers. At times, they could be quite heavy. Let's take a look.
It's a cold and wet outlook, with some heavy downpours throughout the day. Heinz Big Soup sponsors ITV National Weather.
OK, so let's take a look at the forecast as we head into this weekend. As I say, strong winds forecast on both days and those warnings very much in place. Showers through Saturday, rain on Sunday, clearing to showers eventually as we head into the afternoon. But let's take a look at that area of low pressure, which is going to bring in the strong winds and also the rain. As I say, not a named storm, but still it's going to pack a punch out towards western coastal areas. As I say, that's why the warnings are in place for gusts up to around 60 miles an hour. As for this evening, well, it stays relatively unsettled. If you've been out and about today, you're probably making their way northwards as we head through the small hours of Saturday. I don't think we're going to get too many trouble with our temperatures tonight, so no frosty conditions where it stays dry and a little clearer. We're looking at nighttime lows of around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. As we start tomorrow, there will be a bit of a respite for southern parts. You can see in the north, we continue to see, today's rain making its way northwards. Behind it, clearer, brighter conditions for a time, but you can see a scattering of showers on the chart here. But it's not long before we see that area of low pressure move in through the course of Saturday. So Saturday night, if you're going to be out and about, make sure you remember, everybody, perhaps wear a coat. Temperature-wise, tomorrow afternoon, we're looking at daytime highs of around 13 degrees Celsius. As I say, a similar picture into Sunday. More warnings are placed out towards the west. A case of sunny spells and a good scattering of showers. That's your forecast.
Heinz Big Soup sponsors ITV National Weather.
So I'm guessing we're going to need pretty strong umbrellas this weekend.
Yeah, hold on to your brollies, especially if you're going to be by the coast.
OK, I'm not going to the beach, but never mind. Thanks very much, Alex. And finally tonight, among the horror and devastation in Ukraine, there are still remarkable stories of endurance and of hope. You may remember 11-year-old Hassan al-Khalaf, who travelled 750 miles alone to escape the fighting, with just his passport and a phone number drawn on his hand. Well, remarkably, he eventually made it to his older brothers and sisters in Slovakia. Sangeeta Kandola has the story.
Happy to be back with his brothers and sisters. Hassan may be the baby of the family, but he's brave. The 11-year-old was sent alone by his mother from Ukraine to find safety in Slovakia, some 700 miles from home. As Russian arms rang out, he was only armed with his passport and numbers of relatives scribbled on his hand. But he made it.
He was scared that he was in the train in his own, because the train is very, very full. We had 300 people in one carriage. He was talking in foreign language. He wasn't understand anything.
Along the way, Hassan was helped by volunteers to complete the journey, to the amazement of his family.
I wasn't believe, because he is the most young in our family, and he even can't make tea by himself.
Hassan is one of 1.7 million people displaced as a result of the war in Ukraine, and one of millions of children separated from their parents. His mum Yulia, who was looking after her sick mother, stayed behind in Zaporizhia, the site of a nuclear power plant, which was captured.
I want to express my sincere gratitude to all the Slovak customs officers and the volunteers in Slovakia who cared for my son. They helped him cross the border on his own. I am grateful that you saved my child's life.
While Yulia now has some peace of mind about Hassan's safety, the siblings can do what only siblings do best.
And I can tease him and do what I want.
Sangeeta Kandola, ITV News.
What a wonderful family. Right, on News at 10 tonight with Raggy, the celebrated scriptwriter of the hit series The West Wing, talking about the other on-screen president, now turned real-life hero of Ukraine.
He is showing leadership qualities that haven't been seen in this world for a long time.
Do join Raggy and the team for that, but that's it for us for now. Emma Dell's up next, so for me and the whole of the Evening News team here and in Ukraine, do enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.